Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week on Mars. My name is Ian Hewitt with the Gupta College of Science here at Coastal Carolina University. And every week we talk about a different topic related to Mars 2020, the Perseverance rover. Today we're going to talk about one of the instruments on the rover. And this instrument is called Sherloc, and they've been doing a lot of testing and checkout of this instrument. It's a very important instrument. It actually lives at the end of the robotic arm, and I've got it circled here. I'll actually go ahead and circle it in red here. This instrument package on here, one of the key instruments on there is called Sherloc, and it's designed to be held up very close to rocks and other samples and to closely examine them. And it works in conjunction with a couple of imagers to actually identify the composition of what the rocks are made out of. So let's talk about a little bit about Sherloc and how it works. So first of all, the name, why Sherloc? Well, it's an acronym because it's easier than kind of talking about the real name of it. The real name of it is Scanning Habitable Environments with Raman and Luminescence for Organics and Chemicals. And that's a real mouthful. So it's just a lot easier to say Sherloc, and it's a lot easier to type Sherloc when you're talking about it. But what does that really mean? Okay, scanning habitable environments. So we know that the Mars 2020 rover is designed to look for life. But what is Raman? It's actually Raman spectroscopy. What is Raman spectroscopy? So it works on the process of Raman scattering. And this was invented by a physicist called C.B. Raman. He was Indian, and about 100 years ago, he was in the UK and he was traveling back to India. And as you did at that time, if you traveled long distances, you went by sea. So he was on a ship and he started wondering, as all good scientists do, they wonder about things they see. And he said, why does the sea appear blue? And why does when you look at the water different ways, sometimes it looks green, sometimes it looks blue. It depends how you look at it. And he started wondering what the process was at work here. Now, there was something that was already known, and that was called Rayleigh scattering. And Rayleigh scattering is the process which makes the sky blue. And that's a fairly straightforward process. It says that certain wavelengths of light will interact with certain size molecules. And if the wavelengths and the size of the molecule match, they will get scattered, and the other wavelengths will just pass by. So what that really means is, since our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen, that blue light interacts or scatters very well with nitrogen, and so that scattering of the light is what makes our sky appear blue. But was that really the case for water? Because the light's really not traveling through the water uh, in the same way. So what was going on there? So Raman actually had some basic instruments with him, and he started doing experiments. As soon as he got off the boat, he wrote a paper, and then he started doing more experiments. And what he discovered is a massively useful process, and it's called Raman spectroscopy or Raman scattering. And basically, you see this kind of picture here, and there's a lot of things going on, but you see in the middle, there's the two blue things that looks like they're attached by a spring. That's supposed to be a molecule of some sort. So molecule is made of multiple atoms. And you can see that we talked about the Rayleigh scattering, and that's when the light is just the right frequency, it will be scattered in accordance with the way Rayleigh specified. But in terms of even if the light's not the right frequency, there's some interaction with the light based on the molecule, and you'll get different kinds of scattering or different kinds of light effects on the lights, depending on what type of molecule it is. If you look at both high and low effects, and the net effects of all the scattering, you'll discover a lot more about the molecule. So basically, it's kind of a way to shine a light on something, and based on the kind of scattering, the effect that it has on the light, the way the reflections, the way the light reflects, and the way the color looks, you can actually tell something about the substance that you are looking at. This is just a simple way to describe it, but it's actually a very key process in science. So this is the process which the Sherloc instrument uses. It has a series of lasers that emit very specific light. The lasers are not designed to melt anything or anything. It just is put certain frequencies of light, including ultraviolet, and based on the scattering or the effects of that light, they are able to identify what kind of material is in the rock. And what you're kind of looking for is you're kind of looking for clusters of things. Because one thing about when you're looking for biological life tends to cluster together. You almost never find just something like a one bacteria off by its own. You tend to find it in a group, right? They're actually very social. Um, so that's what you're kind of looking for. There's a camera associated with it, of course, because when you're scattering light, you have to pick up the camera. Of course, they named the camera Watson. It's actually two cameras. There's another imager as well, but Sherlock and Watson is the main pair. This is a kind of a close-up of the instrument mounted on a test jig at JPL before it gets mounted in that instrument package at the end of the arm. And this is what it looks like. You can see the camera lens. It's designed to operate very, very close, almost touching the object that it's scanning. So you have to get very close to it, but that also cuts down on a lot of stray light. So that's the way this camera works. If you want to know how it looks, here's an example using the UV laser of a rock sample. And basically what you're getting is the UV laser is shining off the rock sample, and kind of based on the scattering and the effects and the way, and so the camera takes that and interprets it, you can see that it's showing you different compositions of what's in the rock. And basically all the different colors in here are different compositions or different types of molecules. And so you can see that if you just took a regular picture of the rock, it might look something like what you see down here or here. And certainly there are different colors there, and certainly that tells you something. But these color signatures that you're seeing, the bright color signatures you're seeing, are a more unique signature and a more definitive indication of what's actually in that rock. And this is also going to help us try to identify any potential signs of habitable life. And that's really the goal of the Sherlock imager, is hopefully if we could see if we can find any signs of either past life or current life would be really exciting. So when you look at Sherlock, it also has a calibration target. We talked about the target on the top for the SuperCam. Maybe about 2 weeks ago, we talked about there was a round target with different colors in order to calibrate the image, so that you know about what the right color is, because Mars has a little bit different atmospheric color and different light conditions. So you kind of want to know how that's affecting your image. This is the Sherlock calibration target. This is actually on Perseverance rover on Mars. This is just a mosaic of images. You can see they use the Sherlock camera to take a couple of pictures of various parts of it and just kind of stitch those together so you can see what they look like. And you can see across the top there's these basically it's like an eye chart. It's not much different than if you go to the eye doctor and they say what read the last line, or what's the smallest line you can read. Well, it kind of works the same way for Sherlock. To know how well it's calibrated, they actually are able to look at these top bars and say, okay, well, it hasn't been knocked out of calibration because we can see even the really, really small details. In addition, you notice over here, these are like grayscale bars. And again, this is to understand how sensitive how sensitive you are to identifying different shades of color. In this case, different shades of gray. For example, if half of this looked completely white, you notice you know you wouldn't be able to differentiate these light shades of gray. But as you can see, each one looks a little bit different, which is good. Notice not so much here on the dark ones that a lot of them look pretty much the same. So that's important to know when you're taking images, what kind of limitations you're working under. So that's the top part of it. It also has a series of 5 different elements. Now these look like just colored discs, but they really aren't. They're actually different types of elements that it can use its laser on, so it can tell exactly what kind of reading it's get. And they've done this on Earth, so they know exactly what the reading should be. So if the reading comes back a little bit different in Mars conditions, well, they know, okay, then we have to adjust our results, right? So calibration is very, very important. There's some more stuff on this target though that's actually kind of really important. I mean, Sherlock is designed to search for habitable life and identify the composition of rocks. And for scientists, that's very, very important. It really helps further our understanding of Mars. But it's also doing something else that's really, really cool. This is a copy of the, or this is a picture of the Sherlock target here on Earth before it's installed on the rover, just to give you kind of an idea. And this one actually has squares on it instead of circles, but you get the idea. And so basically you're getting the five samples across the top, and you're basically getting five samples across the bottom. But these really don't look like rocks, and they're not. This actually says 221B, which if you have ever read any of the Sherlock Holmes books, that was his address where he lived in London. But really, that's actually just a generic image. It's actually under a certain kind of polycarbonate that they're using for testing. So what is all this testing? What are all these materials for? Well, this is really cool. One thing we also talked about was that one of the goals of the Mars 2020 rover, in addition to trying to find life, is paving the way for crewed exploration of Mars. So for human exploration of Mars. And there's still a lot of questions we need to ask. One of the big questions is on spacesuits. This is Amy Ross. She's one of the designers, advanced spacesuit designers at NASA, with one of the new prototype suits. It's actually the Z2 spacesuit, and this is if we were to launch a mission to Mars today, this is what the spacesuits that the astronauts that land on Mars would wear. You may say, well, wow, we had spacesuits around for a long time back in when Apollo landed on the moon, and that's true. But Mars is a different environment. Mars has some more hostile conditions, but also Mars suits have to be tougher. The Apollo astronauts spent limited amounts of time on the moon. For example, Neil Armstrong. If you ever gone and seen like one of the Avengers movies, one of the Marvel Avengers movies, you spent more time in the theater than Neil Armstrong did on the moon. So the suits, although they were very good in the Apollo days, they weren't designed to last for long periods of time. When we send humans to Mars, they're going to have to last, best case, for 30 days, but some mission profiles call for lasting up to 6 months, which means they're going to have to be tougher. They're going to have to be more resilient. They're going to have to stand up to a lot more radiation and a lot more adverse conditions. So that's what another primary purpose of Sherlock is to try to uh, look at how suit materials perform on Mars. So what you get is when you look at these targets across the bottom, the first one where it said 221B Baker Street, that's actually beneath a polycarbonate. That's actually what they would use for the helmet. And so the idea is that we're going to put the polycarbonate test material there and see how it gets affected. It's going to get all the Mars sunlight. It's going to get all the UV from Mars. And if you ever left anything outside and it kind of faded because of UV light, we don't get nearly as much UV here on Earth as we do on Mars. So the UV is very tough. It can really take a toll on plastics and certain materials. It can make them brittle and break. And that's the last thing you want for your helmet. So they're going to test polycarbonate. And there's various other materials. You see Vectran, orthofabric, Teflon, and coated Teflon in each of the colors. And this has a colored bar over it to show you which one is which. And the thing is, the reason this is on the Sherlock instrument calibration target is the Sherlock instrument will basically periodically go and examine each one of these sections using that Raman spectroscopy and look for any changes or how the material gets affected. And they've done a lot of tests here on Earth using Sherlock, using a copy of Sherlock under certain conditions to know what should be happening to these materials. But that may be different than what happens on Mars. So like if you see a material starting to break down, like say after 30 days, you know that if you've got a 6 months mission, you don't want that material in your spacesuit. So that's a very important element of this mission. Again, it's paving the way for human exploration of Mars. Here's an example of the current two spacesuits that are being looked at for Artemis, which is of course the planned missions to the moon, as well as for Mars and beyond. The first one, the one on the left, is what the astronauts would wear in the space capsule for launch and landing. And you can see that it's orange because that's a safety color. So in case they would have to land in the water, it'd be real easy to spot. You can see the the connections, it would actually hook up into the new space capsules that NASA is designing, like the Orion space capsule, actually allows them to hook into it. But it's not really designed for being on Mars. And you can see the Z2, this is a full-size version of a Z2 prototype that you can see what they wear on Mars. One thing you may also notice is it kind of looks like the Z2, how do you get into it? It kind of almost looks like it opens up from the back, and it actually does. It actually opens up, the back entirely opens up, and you just climb straight in. Why is that important? Well, that's important because Mars has a lot of dust. And unlike Earth, where there's a lot of water that kind of rounds off dust particles, these dust particles are very sharp. And the problem is they're not good to inhale. And part of the problem is you don't want to be going into an airlock in a spacesuit and taking off the spacesuit and breathing all that dust in. So how do you avoid that? Well, one of the things they're looking at is that you would just back up to an airlock and connect your suit. And the suit, the body of the suit still stays outside, but it connects, it seals in back. And then you just open up the back part of it and you just climb out and you're in the habitat. So these are just some of the things. We'll talk more about future things for Mars in future episodes. But I hope you found this interesting. Everybody have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.